וכעת יש לי הכבוד והעונג לעבור ולהציג את המרצה הנואל, הפותח, סליחה, של היום הנואל של הכנס, את פרופסור ערן כרמל. תסלחו רגע לידיים שלי. השנה אנחנו מארחים בכנס את פרופסור הרן כרמל, שנמצא כאן איתנו מאמריקן יוניברסיטי שבוושינגטון די.סי. פרופסור כרמל הוא פרופסור לטכנולוגיית מידע בבית הספר קוגוט למנהל עסקים. הוא חוקר את תחום הגלובליזציה בעבודה, כולל מיקור גלובלי, מיקור המונים, צוותים גלובליים וצמיחת תעשיות הטכנולוגיה ברחבי העולם. ספרו Global Software Teams, שיצא בשנת 1999, נחשב אבן דרך בתחום דעת זה. ספר אחר שאותו פרסם יחד עם אלברטו אספינוזה בשנת 2012, נושא את הכותרת "אני עובד בזמן שהם ישנים, אתגרים ופתרונות להפרדה בין אזורי זמן". אני שמח להזמין את פרופסור כרמל שידבר כעת על עתיד העבודה ומקום העבודה וכמה השלכות על למידה לאורך החיים. ערן, בבקשה.
תודה לנשיא אשת ולניצה גרי ולוורד סילבר שהזמינו וארגנו כאן את הכנס היפה הזה. ובמסורת צ'ייס, I'm switching to English. So first of all, I'm from Washington, D.C. I work about 6 kilometers from the White House. And I apologize for the results. Technology is the driver of the future. And so the focus on looking into the future today will be on a technological future. We are going to look at a medium-term future now at the year 2030. We're going to look forward into that year, and I want to tell you just briefly why we're going to do that. I'm a professor of technology. I've been in technology since my university days, and I began to be interested in the future because of that, because I understood that technology is so much a driver of the future, and I began teaching courses in the future, and now I infuse the study and the thinking of the future in every course that I teach. And so this is very much derived, this talk today is very much derived from that. So, okay. So here's the agenda for now, for the next 40 minutes. Well, I'll give you a brief introduction to scenarios, and then I'll walk through the 4 scenarios. That's the core of what I'm going to do today. They're contradictory scenarios, narratives. I'll explain what that is. We'll include an audience poll at the beginning. And then briefly I'll talk about lifelong learning and what the lessons are for us. Okay. So I'm going to give you a crash course on how to think about the future. And the key methodology that futurists use to think about the future is a qualitative method called scenarios, tachishim. Quantitative methods tend to break down after when we look into the future more than a few months, more than a few years. And so we use qualitative methods, and it's scenarios. It's perhaps the most important methodology that we as futurists use. Notice that it is listed as a plural. It has an S at the end. So we build not one scenario of the future, because we cannot predict the future, but many scenarios of the future. And as you will see, we will build 8 scenarios of the future today. Now, quickly about the power of scenarios. They expand your thinking. Scenarios uncover inevitable or near inevitable futures. And they help in your planning. They help in your planning as individuals, as organizations, and as nations. Most consultants use the 2x2 approach refined by Schwartz or some iteration of that. Schwartz is a futurist who worked at RAND and SRI. Those are think tanks in the United States. And then he applied them in the giant oil company, Royal Dutch Shell, and he described them in the book, The Art of the Long View. The objective of scenarios is to tell stories that are plausible and relevant and that are useful in planning. So this is a classic Schwartz 2x2. You notice here that there's 4 future scenarios that you think about, that you plan for. And they are built around 2 axes, the X and the Y, that have contradictory narratives about the future. So here it's high fuel prices versus low fuel prices. High protectionism versus low protectionism. And then you build 4 scenarios of the future and you begin to think about those. Okay. So the art of thinking about the future is to choose those axes, the XY axis, that make a difference for business decision makers or policy makers, or even for you. Again, you can use this methodology for planning your future. And they have to have a somewhat equal likelihood of occurring. So, for example, at the bottom of this slide, you see crime can increase or decrease. Driverless cars can be adopted fast or slow, or global warming recognition can be either embraced or resisted. All right, so I did the work for you on this one, and let's spend some time here. I hope that you can all read this slide. I know it's a busy one. Look at the 2 right columns now. I'll go over this a couple of times, and I'm going to... אנחנו נעשה סקר כאן בקהל, so pay attention. כן. So first, I'll read them to you quickly. You're going to make choices now, each of you individual, about what you think is the more likely scenario in the 4 contradictory narratives, either dispersed or compressed. That's number 1, and I'll explain them. Number 2 is atomistic versus holistic. Number 3 is human decisions versus machine decisions. And number 4 is poets versus Homer Simpsons. Okay, you all know Homer Simpson, yes? Okay, so let's talk about number 1. I'm going to take the poll at the end, and Vered will help me. Will we be more virtual and dispersed in the future, or will we be more compressed and proximate, dechus? So dispersed versus compressed. Contradictory narrative number 2. Will our work be atomized and our firms atomized, very small, or will we see our work being very holistic, and will the firms be larger and more powerful and more global? Number 3, human decisions versus machine decisions. Who will make the decisions in the year 2030? Will it be creative workers, or will it be the machines? And finally, number 4, once the robots take over in the year 2030, will we be self-actualized poets, mimush atzmi, or will we all be couch potatoes like Homer Simpson? Okay, all right, so now let's take the poll here. Vered, boi tazri li. Okay, so number 1, and everybody has to vote. You can't say, oh, I'm not sure. You have to vote. And Vered will count so we see what the audience thinks about the future 13, 14 years into the future. Okay, so number 1, how many think that our future will be dispersed? אני רואה יותר מ-20%. בואי נגיד 30. How many do you think it will be compressed? Okay, אני רואה לפחות 50%. אבל תעשי את. כן, אוקיי. אנחנו צריכים... פעם הבאה אני לחלק לכם לחצנים כאלה. All right, number 2. How many think that the future will be atomistic, very small units of work, very small firms? How many think that it will be holistic, big, powerful firms, big work for all of you? Okay? Okay. All right, number 3. Let's talk about human decisions. Who will make the decisions of the future? The human or the machine? So first, the human. Okay. And how many think that will be the machine? פחות. אני חושב שפחות, זה 60-40, לא? מה את ראית? Okay. All right, and in that future, and number 4, the last one, how many of you think that in this future we will all be able to be self-actualized poets? Raise your hand. And how many think that we will be Homer Simpsons? Yeah. All right. Okay. תודה רבה. Okay, so let's talk about contradictory narrative number 1, dispersed or compressed. And I'm going to talk about each of them individually. So the future is, in one way, clearly virtual and dispersed. We all know about the meme of anytime, anywhere. You see these pictures everywhere, these business people and technologists working on the beach. We've come a long way in the last 10, 20 years, a tremendous way, and I've seen this. I've really enjoyed this. I began my own research about dispersion and distributed work, which is the core of my work as a researcher in about 1990, and I researched teams that are global and companies that are global. Just think about what happened 10 years ago. 10 years ago, we didn't have a smartphone yet. We had those flip phones that you open and close. Do you remember? Just 10 years ago. Facebook was something that just college students used. Most of you probably never heard of it. FaceTime, which allows me to walk along the sidewalk here in Tel Aviv and talk to my daughter, was complete science fiction. And we didn't have something like Twitter. So we've come a long way in just 10 years. Now, the current technologies which are young are telepresence, and which is done at HP and Cisco, very high quality audio and visuals, large-scale video meetings, with many people on the screen, very high quality. I just taught a class last night at 2 o'clock, by the way, from my hotel room. It's still amazing to me. And holographic images, which are still young. And in fact, in this future, in 2030, we're probably going to be represented by avatars, by robots, and by holographs. So I wanted to show you a little bit about your future here. So, and the future will be represented in these virtual worlds by avatars, so a little bit like Second Life. So there's the avatar of me. There's Steve Jobs, there's Barack Obama, והנה נוני Moses. And we'll be represented in the office perhaps by this technology which already exists, which is a robot that can roam around the hallways and represents you from far away. There's you on the screen and can peek into people's offices. This has been around for a while. It's not popular yet, but it can be. Here's an interesting technology. It's a hologram that's very powerful from a company in the Silicon Valley called Magic Leap, which is still in development. I'll show you a very short video. This is the only video I want to show you because it's so impressive. Now, it's still in development. And okay, so you can imagine that once these kind of technologies get more sophisticated, they will be able to represent us in the virtual work. All right, on the other hand, I argued for dispersion. I'm going to give you on one hand, on the other hand, a lot. On the other hand, we see compression in cities. Cities are clearly compressing. Ken.
Do you have any idea what it's like to create a masterpiece?
Technology is not perfect.
To make a piece that will stand the test.
Okay, technology isn't perfect. So we see that the cities are becoming more dense. The density per square kilometer is going up in the urban cores in major cities, including here in Tel Aviv. Cities tend to become more efficient and more productive as they become more dense. There are a number of studies that show that, although I have to say it's controversial, but there are some interesting statistics. In San Francisco, for example, the productivity per square meter just in a period of 4 years recently went up $700 per person per square meter, which is a remarkable statistic. So we're seeing this compression, inside cities, like the city I come from, Washington, D.C., is going through enormous inwards migration, gentrification. I was just 2 months ago in Dublin. You see the same thing. You see this in Los Angeles. You see it in Tel Aviv. You see it in many cities, except for China. That's the only exception, really, in major places. Now, 20 years ago, a book came out that made a big impression called The Death of Distance by Karn Cross. And so I agree that distance is dead because of these distance technologies, but location is still important. Tel Aviv, London, New York, Washington, and so on. And there's the movements of the elites into the cities. They move there for quality of life, for walkability, for biking, for restaurants. And they move there for what is now called collision space for knowledge workers, for the creative class. And these are the places where people meet to network, they meet to coordinate, and they meet to be creative and to generate ideas. Now, it applies to cities, but it also applies to office space. And I want to spend a few minutes on office space. I've been interested in office space since I began being a researcher because of what I was looking at distributed decision-making and how people work together. So I've been looking at this for many years. And here's those of you who are in the software world, you know about agile team rooms, Pituach Agili. And you see here an agile software team room. You see that they're very compressed. They're very close together. They're very close together because we realize that in spite of the technology, people need to coordinate and they need to do a lot of micro-coordination and create creative work, creative discussions. And so this is an open space design. And in fact, this collision space for knowledge workers is really the dominant thinking now. We want people to work very close together. This is the typical office environment that you know of. This is in Facebook, one of the richest companies in the world, and yet they have open space for 70% of their workers are in these kind of open areas. It's not an attractive place as a photograph, but I want to show you open space that at least has some bright light. Maybe some of you work in a place like that. This is my favorite office space, open office. This is Mad Men, the 1960s TV series that I loved. And of course, here the secretaries work in the open space, and the men sit around and they have their own offices. Now, the cubicle came into being in the 1960s, this notion of the open office. And this picture from the 1980s, 1970s now goes back a long time and became popular in the 70s and 80s. And by the 80s, there was pushback against the open office. This is a cartoon from Dilbert, who satirized the cubicle. But we still very much have it today. Now, another notion that came in the 1990s is the notion of hoteling. Once our computers began to be mobile, we were able to design the workspace that is compressed, that's close together, so that people can meet and talk. Now, there are a number of trends influencing workplace design nowadays. There's compression, which I talked about, so that there would be collision space, מקום להתנגשות אקראית. There's the issues of lighting if we're working in those kind of places, so there's some interesting solutions there. And acoustics, because of privacy. There are clearly privacy issues. And then there's the notion of activity-based design, where you do different kinds of tasks in different parts of your workspace. I'll show you a few more pictures of the future. So WeWork is a company that I think all Israelis know. We have a number of locations here in Israel, and this company was founded by an Israeli who is now a very wealthy man. Now, the important thing here is that this is a workspace, and yet it looks like a nice bar, restaurant, and that's so that there would be collision space, because we want to be close together in spite of the technology. So this is another WeWork space somewhere else. It looks like a hotel lobby. It's very elegant. I visited, there's a number of WeWorks in Washington, D.C. This is one downtown, not that far from the White House. This is me and a colleague just last year. Now, because of privacy, there are some acoustic issues, and here's a very interesting solution at Google Amsterdam. To privacy, you go into this. And here's another interesting solution to privacy. These are plexiglass domes so that you can have a private conversation. All right, so those are some, that's contradictory narrative number one. Let me move to contradictory narrative number two. Will our future be atomized in tasks and work and firms, or will it be large, and will our work be large in terms of holistic tasks? The big companies are omnipotent. Kol yacholim. These are the big five tech companies now of the world. They all happen to be in America right now. I'm not sure how long that's going to last. These are very, very powerful companies, these big five. They know everything about what we do, everything. They're very profitable, they're very influential, and of course they're global, except some of them cannot operate in China. Now in Israel we see the same thing. This is a ranking from the Duns 100 based on revenues and global employment, not my ranking. These are the five largest, most powerful firms in Israel, and they're very large and powerful. The size still very much matters. Now, in the United States, we see a phenomenon that surprises people. With the Fortune 500 is a list that goes back many decades, and the relative percentage of employees who work of the workforce in the United States in the Fortune 500 has remained constant. That's that line here that you see right here. It's been constant. It's just under 20%, 17, 18% now for many years, in spite of the technology and in spite of all the stories that we tell. Big is very successful. Small firms often fail. You know this from startups here in Israel. In fact, the failure rate now in the United States is larger than the startup rate, at least in the United States. Israel is perhaps an exception. Startups are, small firms and startups are hiring fewer people, according to the Kaufman Foundation, which is perhaps the most important think tank in the United States that researches startups and entrepreneurship in small firms. Okay, so that's one part of the contradictory narrative. The other part is the atomization of the firm is, in fact, very much very important nowadays. We have small digitally enabled firms that are able to become viable very quickly. You start up and there's a whole ecosystem waiting for you to become to grow very quickly. You sell on Etsy, you accept payments on Square, you contract with labor, cheap labor in India via Upwork, you scale with the cloud via Amazon Web Services. If you're Israeli, you're born global very quickly. Okay. And in fact, U.S. venture capital into startups has been increasing year after year after year. Now, so that's the atomization of the firm. Now, let me talk about the atomization of work, of our tasks, of how we work as individuals. The new term in the United States now is the gig economy. And והתרגום היחידי לגיג זה חלטורה, אבל זה לא מספק אותי התרגום הזה. צריך למצוא משהו אחר. In the United States, we also call this the alternative work arrangements. So a gig is a project, like an artist, a musician does a gig at a club for one night. And we also talk about a gig being one task. And so this is the new term, the gig economy. In fact, in the United States, 8% of workers have now earned money in the last year in some kind of digital platform, according to very recent research. And according to several economic studies of labor, if you take all the temporary workers and the contractors and the freelancers together in the United States, you see that at the bottom of the slide, they were about 10% in the year 2010, and they're up to almost 16% now in the United States. That's a remarkable change in how people work. Now, because I've been interested in outsourcing for many years, I've looked at global outsourcing. I began following something that we could call it the gig economy, but we've called it for a number of years crowdsourcing, mikur hamonim. And I want to introduce this to you through a little bit and spend a moment on this. So the basic platform model works like this. You have the buyers on the left. Those are the large organizations or the small organizations. You have the workers on the right. That's the crowd. And the innovation here is in the middle. That's the crowdsourcing platform, the marketplace. And this is the future of labor. It'll all be run through these platforms. We will all be essentially contractors on a task or a project basis. And probably many of you have used this already part-time as students. There are about 1,000 platforms that do this kind of digital work out there in the marketplace. Let me point to just a few of them. There's Upwork, which I mentioned before. That's probably one of the largest. It's a conglomeration of Odesk and Elance, which have both been around for many years. There's Amazon Mechanical Turk, which does microtasks, the tasks that can be as small as a minute for maybe 10 cents or 50 cents. Another company with interest for us here, because it was founded by an Israeli, Doron Reuveni, is UTest. It does software testing, and it's the #1 global company in software testing. UTest, that's here in the middle. So there are many companies. In the United States, when you talk about the gig economy, the #1 thing that comes to mind for Americans is Uber, the taxi company. And it's nothing like the Get that we have here in Israel. It's nothing like it because all the drivers are contractors and all the cars are their own. So it's not, these are not taxi companies. And in the United States, globally, there's already 1 million drivers who have driven on Uber. In the U.S., globally, there are 300,000 active drivers. So this is a major change in the way that people work. It's about short term. So we talked about digital and we talked about physical. Let me just go back briefly to the nature of work. So we talked about these big, powerful companies like Google, but you know, Google, a lot of its employees are not really employees. They're contractors. They have 70,000 non-employees. And here's an interesting prediction, the second bullet point. By 2025, the first Global 2000 company will have no employees. It'll be a virtual company. It will only have executives in the C-suite. The C-suite is American business jargon for the corporate suite, for executives, anala bchira. Very interesting prediction. Let's see if that is indeed the case. So that argues for very small firms that are very virtual. Let me come back to the issue of what is in it for us. So we talked about us contracting through these digital platforms and doing very small jobs or doing projects. But in fact, if you ask most people, not all people, but most people, what they want out of their work, they want a holistic work experience. And so I blended the results of quite a number of surveys. And if you ask most of the people in this room and most people in companies, they want full-time stable employment. They want less stress. They want a work-life balance. They want benefits, particularly in the United States because of health insurance. It's less of an issue here in Israel. They want opportunity for advancement. They want a sense of purpose and pride in where they work. And they want to feel a sense of trust, fairness, and respect from their superiors. So this is what people want. Okay, so that's narrative number 2. Let's move on to contradictory narrative number 3. And this is about who makes decisions, the machine or the human being. So we've been hearing and reading a lot about machines making more decisions. And perhaps the #1 place where we're hearing about this is in driverless cars. Who will make the decision in driverless cars? We've all been exposed to this. And let me just tell you an anecdote that perhaps you haven't heard of. And so somebody has to program a decision for these driverless cars of what the car will do in the case where the car is about to get into an accident. Does the car run over the grandmother or the baby carriage? That's a decision that has to be made by software. These are very difficult decisions. Now, because of the machines AI, artificial intelligence, taking over, there's a lot of interest in the United States, and I think here as well, in the issue of loss of jobs. And so a famous study now is one that came out by two researchers out of Oxford that predicts that 47%, that's almost half, of the U.S. workforce are in jobs that are at high risk of being automated within the next 20 years. In other words, they'll be replaced by the robot that's over here on the left. Do you think your job will be replaced by a robot or by automation within the next 20 years? Raise your hand if you think so. Okay, so this is definitely not 50%. And this is the illusion that we all tell ourselves. There's only about 10 people who raised their hand here. This is the illusion that we tell ourselves that, yeah, half the jobs will be obsolete, but not my job. No, of course not. And this is very typical. Now, the idea that computers will make more decisions is not new. In my field in information systems, this has been discussed under the banner of decision support systems for many years. The idea emerged in the 1960s and 1970s. Here's a definition: a computer-based system to aid decision-making. So it's to aid decision-making, not to replace humans quite yet. And it continued to evolve in the 1980s. So we know that computers can help us make decisions. In fact, they're already making decisions for us. So in the United States, credit scoring and loan decisions are all made by computers now. They're not made by bankers anymore. Stock trading is usually made by computers now and not by human beings. In the near future, other types of work will also be done by computer. Your work assignments will be done by computer. Your teaming, who decide who to match up with you for teams, a little bit like eHarmony for Teams or Tinder. And decision tracking will help inform these decisions. So we will look at you as managers and see how often you make good decisions. Now, having said that, actually, those statistics I think are a little bit misleading about how many jobs will become obsolete, because I think that some of the tasks will become obsolete. So let's take the two classic cases here: the cashier at the supermarket and the teller at the bank. In spite of automation, these two jobs are still there. We still have those at the supermarket, and we still have the teller at the bank in spite of the kaspomat. And there's some reasons for that, especially here in Israel. So we see that the jobs are now different. The teller at the bank does a different kind of job than he or she did 30, 40 years ago. And I think that that's what's going to happen with many of our jobs. All right, so let's look at robots here. Let me make three generalizations about robots, and I was inspired here by Adam Caper, who's from the Cato Institute, which is a think tank in Washington. First of all, robots are definitely coming. Robot use is already increasing, and they can replace humans or augment them. They can enhance humans. All jobs are prone to automation, the low level, the middle level, and the high level. And so beginning with the lower level jobs, robots will do the DDD, the dangerous, dirty, and demeaning jobs. So that's soldiers and police and firemen and logging and fishing. Yeah, to read this in Israel, it has a different meaning. And the demeaning jobs like waste disposal and slaughter. And then there's the fourth D, which is driving. If we indeed have driverless cars and driverless trucks, then 3 million truck drivers will be out of work in the United States. Now, robots, we saw this slide already. Robots can represent us. So the robots will be in the office, but they will also be in other ways in the office. These are robots that already exist. This is Betty. She patrols the office. She walks around all day long. She never gets tired. She counts the employees. She checks that the doors are locked and that the temperature is right. She greets the guests. She might clean up a little bit. This is Pepper. He is working in a hospital in Belgium. He speaks 20 languages, and he greets people and he walks them to the right room and perhaps does other things. So this is just the beginning. Here's a slide with a few more examples. For example, the second bullet point is Nestle. It has robots who sell coffee makers in stores. Now we see these robots beginning to appear, especially in countries which are aging very rapidly. So that's South Korea, Japan, and West Germany. That's the flags there at the bottom. But we will certainly see them in other places as well. Before we get scared about robots, I want to remind all of you that we will be robots, or we will be cyborgs, or we will be bionic a little bit by 2030 and certainly by 2050. I want to introduce you to this is Amy Purdy. She's on the U.S. Olympic, Paralympic team. She's a skateboarder. And in case you can't see it in the picture over there, which is not that clear, she has no legs. And she is dancing with a robot. So she is already somewhat bionic, and yet we don't think about it that way. We will all eventually go in that direction. So she is enhanced, mishudreget, and we will all be enhanced by 2030 and 2040. So it's not just robots, which are three-dimensional things which move around and look a little bit humanoid, but it's the rise of agents. Gartner, which is a technology research firm, says that by 2020, the average person will have more conversations with bots, those are software bots, they're not physical, than with their spouse. Think about that. That 30% of web browsing sessions will be done without a screen. So I went out last year and bought one of these agents. The two famous ones in the United States are Amazon Echo and Google Home. I bought the one on the right, that's Google Home. And it's in the background for me. Mostly what it does is it plays music for me. It's still a pretty stupid agent as far as I'm concerned, but I'm hoping that it'll do more. How many of you have one of these at home? No, nobody yet. In the US, you see 10 to 20% of the hands go up at this point. And also think about the car. The car is beginning to interact with you. It essentially has a software agent in the car. You might be talking to your car already. We see this in the United States. How many of you speak to your car and give it orders? No, not yet. But again, in the US, we're beginning to see this. It'll come to Israel very quickly. So this is happening. There are a lot of agents and chatbots already that are interacting with us in the background. They make financial decisions with us, for us. They do scheduling with us, for us. The bottom bullet point there's a bot there that's your friend. In China, there's a Microsoft bot called Xiaoxi that has 20 million people talking to her. Now, popular culture is helping us to accept these agents. If you think about the Avengers and the character that Robert Downey Jr. is called, his name is Tony Stark, and so he has an agent in the background that's talking to him all the time, right? Jarvis, if you've seen these movies, if you're into that. So we're becoming used to this. It'll be second nature to us. One area that I'm interested in is robotic process automation. So this is entirely, again, a software agent that works in the background. So why did jobs go to India with offshore outsourcing? They went there because there's a very talented workforce that's very cheap. But what if we can replace them for their low-level tasks with automation? And that's what's happening now with this RPA, this robotic process automation. These are agents that can learn to do routine office work tasks by observing the screen. There's no coding necessary. You don't have to write APIs, application programming interfaces. They can learn by themselves and therefore take over from human beings. Okay. All right, so if you recall, I showed you this slide and I said we're going to lose maybe about half of the jobs by 2030. So how do we make sure that we don't lose our jobs? The people who are less likely to lose their jobs are the creative class. And so there's a definition. They are the creative tasks are cognitive, non-routine tasks. And a lot of people have been thinking about this. They divide up the creative class into two layers. The top layer are the super creative core. 12% of the US workforce, they do science and engineering and arts and design and media. The next layer are the knowledge workers, healthcare, business, finance, legal, and education. So I suppose we're in the second layer. We're not in the super creative class. All right, and we work very hard to be more creative in our jobs. So that many of you in the audience and myself and other professors, we have lots of behavioral and technological enhancements to make us be more creative. So we eat brain food. That's an expression in the US, to eat brain food, food that makes us think better. We take pills and stimulants, we drink coffee, we smoke things, we take breaks and we play football, כדורגל כזה. And we do exercise, we take walks, we do yoga, we have simulations, we do gamification, so all so that we can be more creative. Let me just say one more thing about the future of work, and that's measurement. We, just like your Fitbit, how many of you are wearing a smartwatch of some kind of wearable technology? Okay, so I'm saying 5 to 10%. Just like you are measuring your health and your fitness now, we will increasingly be measured in our work. We see this in many of the big companies in the United States. Amazon measures the number of steps to retrieve every item in warehouses. McDonald's knows exactly where to put workers based on its predictive analytics, where to place them in the store so that they're ready for the customers. UPS tracks exactly which driver, for every driver, how many stops he or she makes and what speed they're driving at, and so on. Okay, let me go to the last one. This is short. This is the contradictory narrative number 4. So once robots take over, will we be self-actualized poets, or will we be all Homer Simpson couch potatoes? And I'm not optimistic about that. The average American in 2014 watched 5 hours of TV per day, and now you can just replace it with Netflix. It's the same thing. And only 3% of Americans have read poetry in the last 12 months. So I think that much more likely to choose Homer Simpson. So I think that we do have to plan, at least to some extent, for a workless future, a post-work future, in which our people's relationship with work will be different, and maybe their identity will be different. It won't be so connected to their work. All right, so let's do a summary here. I think we're going to do fine on time. Let's do a summary here. So I presented to you 4 contradictory narratives of the future, and I have the results here. So if you recall, they were, for number 1, it was, and I'm reading it from left to right, 30% and 50%. And on number 2, it was 3% and 97%. And on number 3, it was 60% and 40%. 60-40. And on the last one, it was 10% and 80%. 80%. All right, how many of you have changed at least one of your votes in the last half hour? Raise your hand. Okay, well, there's some openness here. I was hoping that there would be more. Israelis never change their minds, right? Okay. All right, so what are the implications for lifelong learning? And with this, I'll close. So if you take these 4 contradictory narratives, that creates 8 scenarios of the future. They're not mutually exclusive, but let me just leave you with some thoughts about how to prepare for your careers in the future. Now, some of these are obvious, I know, but some of them perhaps are maybe a little bit less obvious. So let's look at the first one. The first narrative was either virtual or proximate. Well, if you believe that the future will be dispersed and virtual, then you have to become a master, an expert on distance technologies. You have to really master them. And so it's more than Skype, it's whatever the new technology is. If you think that the future will be compressed and proximate, you have to learn to become a team member, to work very closely with people, and to develop your interpersonal skills. If you think that the future is atomized in small firms, then you have to try a startup, or at least work for a startup for a little bit, and definitely try some of the crowdsourcing tasks on those platforms and just do a few just for fun to see how it feels. If you think that the future will be big and that the big powerful companies will dominate, then you definitely have to learn management. That's my field. Number 3, if you think that creative people will make decisions, then where we have an advantage over the computer 15 years from now is in being creative, in generating ideas. So develop your competency around creative methodologies. And so that's ideation, and that's the new fad in creative thinking is design thinking, which is a methodology that's used at IBM and Booz Allen and many big consulting companies. If you think that the future is in machines making decisions, then you should develop your capabilities in analytics and cognitive programming and the ability to program machines to do machine learning. Finally, if you think that the future is in becoming a self-actualized poet, then you have to go to Burning Man in Nevada or Midbern, כאן בארץ, ללמוד בישיבה, או ללמוד ספרות. If you think that the future is in Bart Simpson couch potatoes, then you have to watch in the United States Keeping Up with the Kardashians, או בארץ המאושרות. תודה רבה.